Hey everyone, it's Javi here, and in this video I'm going to walk you through the design process and the thinking that went into designing a feed of social posts for Tribe. This is part 2 of a 5-video series on some of the core product areas that go into designing any social or multiplayer product experience. If you'll recall and you watched my previous video, that was all about the posting experience. So now we're going to take it full circle, going from the moment when the user is going to be posting something on one end, and then the feed is where that content is going to get rendered into the platform itself. That's what we're going to be talking about today. If you happen to be watching me for the first time, welcome. My name is Javi, and I make weekly videos about product design skills, principles, and practices to help you build digital products and bring your ideas to life. If that sounds like something that you're interested in watching, don't forget to hit subscribe. In order to get things started, this time I'm going to walk you through the current experience, the current feed experience on Tribe, which is, by the way, the product team that I've been a part of for the past year and building the product alongside some incredible people. And I'm just here to walk you through what we have right now. So as you can see, this is a platform for communities, right? So you can use Tribe to build your own community for your business. And here you can see that we land right here on the feed. This is, by the way, Tribe Campfire. It's our own company's community built on Tribe itself. And as you can see here, I am in the feed, and you can see that within the feed are a bunch of cards that are posts that people have dropped into our community. Per card, it all starts with the post author. And the post author here is simply a component that includes the post author's avatar. So in this case, it can be either a placeholder if the user has not specified any image, as is this case, or if there is an image that the user has already uploaded, then that's what we're displaying. Then there is going to be the post author name, followed in this case by the name of the space. And in Tribe, a space is simply sort of like a Facebook group, if you will. And we are showing this in order to let the user know, right? So I logged into Tribe Campfire, and here I have a feed essentially of everything that I'm subscribed to. So I am seeing this because I am subscribed to community success, to Tribe product feedback. And you can see a bunch of posts from that one, which is pretty active. And so, yeah, that basically gives me an idea of from what spaces I'm getting new posts from. And as you can see, each of these has a title. So I can see the title of the post. I can see a description. And then at some point, we are doing some truncation because posts in Tribe, as you can see, for example, this is a really great example of a post that not only has text, but it also has a numbered list. And at the very bottom, there is also a link that is embedded through our iframe integration, by the way. So that is here, and I can open and close this, right? And then here are just 2 buttons for me to just quickly engage with the post itself through the feed. If I actually click on the reply, it's going to take me to a dedicated page for that post. One thing that we do want to improve in the very near future is going to be the ability for our customers and their own users to be able to reply in line within the feed itself, as well as to give controls to the admins of the community of whether they want to show here some comments, if there are any comments per post. So this one, for example, has no comments, but this one, as you can see, does have 1 comment, and we are displaying a preview of it, very slight preview, by showing you the avatar of the person that commented. And if I were to click on this, then you can see that there's this wacky placeholder. And once it loads, then you can see here the reply itself. So big part of this feed is that, people want to see the active conversations that are happening in their community. And right now they're not able to do that because we are progressively disclosing the comments of each post. And there's a little bit too much friction involved in actually getting to it. So heads up for that. That is one change we're going to make. And this is just to say that this could be something like some kind of product decision that you have to make within your own feed indicates that the content that you are displaying has some kind of follow-up action. And if for any like social multiplayer experience, it's very common that people can in some way like reply to the post. So you have to make a call whether you want to support that pattern or not of displaying more info per post. All right, so I took you through this, and I think it's also worth sharing that if I actually go to the space itself, then each space on its own is sort of a feed, right? So I can scroll down here and you can see that now I am in the dedicated feed of this space, which means that we no longer have to be specific about, what space is each post in, because that is obvious now. And yeah, that's pretty much a wrap of the current feed experience. There is a bunch of things that we have to do here to actually get it to the vision that we want it to. But I think this serves as a pretty good 5-minute explainer of what's going on at Tribe right now. But the interesting thing about this video is not the final result, but actually the journey of how we got to where we got today, because there's a lot of hard decisions and sort of things that we've explored. And when you actually get to see this and use it, like most products, you don't really get to understand why certain decisions are made, the process that went, the thinking that went into certain trade-offs that you had to deal with. A lot of it also just has to do not with the product itself, but also just like time constraints, resource constraints. So hopefully this video will shed some light into that as well. And I hope that it's also helpful for you if you are designing a social product, that it will give you some inspiration in case that you do need to implement a feed anywhere in that product. All right, so without further ado, I will take you straight to Figma. And for you exclusively, I have made a sort of time travel experience here. We're going to go from the very beginning, and I'm just sort of going to walk you through what we've explored in the past and how that has shaped where we are today. So in the same way that I've explored the last time, this is actually a modernized version of the old version of Tribe. This is something that when I joined Tribe a little over a year ago, it was one of the focus projects. We had this platform with a lot of technical depth, but we were also lacking just general aesthetics of the platform, and we felt like there was a good opportunity for Tribe, just taking all the functionality that it had and polishing things a little bit on the end user interface. And we feel like that could be quite an improvement on the platform in itself. And it actually delayed by a few months, having me actually get started into brainstorming the new version of Tribe that we currently have live for all of you. So we did spend like some time on this, and as you can see, this is what we used to have, which is still very similar to what our customers with the old version of Tribe are seeing. And you can see one of the like core principles that we wanted to follow with this feed in general is the concept that you can consume the community mindlessly scrolling through your feed, right? It's what a lot of people are used to coming from other social networks. You just either with the mouse or with your thumb, and you're just like mindlessly consuming the content that you care about. So here it was a little bit more overscoped at what we have right now. So we have controls here for people to be able to decide if they want to see like in what order specifically do they want to see the posts. Maybe they want to filter by types. So I actually just showed you discussions, but we also have sort of like question kind of type posts, and I can actually take you to that for a second. So I think if we go to, I think feature requests, we are displaying that differently. So if this will load up for me, you can see that this layout is a little bit different, and I'm gonna actually take the time now in a bit to walk you through why this is, why this looks different to the other space that I showed you, and sort of what are the decisions that got us here. I think it'll become clearer in a few minutes. Okay, so going back here, right? We have these filters that I just mentioned. This one is actually a toggle for the layout. And this is because in general, like early on, we've always known that every community is a world of its own, and they want to have different ways to visualize their content. And that can be something that spurs out of what the brand of the company is within itself, and what kind of community they want to have, what kind of content and parts of the content they want to highlight within their own community. There are, of course, patterns, but ultimately within the community space, every single company that is coming and looking for a community platform solution, they are looking for a very custom approach to just having something on Facebook as a Facebook group, right? They want the customization. So that has been part of this project, since the very early stages of how do we get our customers to look at the same content in different ways. Okay, so here you can see, for example, this post here is pinned at the very top. You can see sort of the structure of the post, right? It's very similar to what our current experience is. You have the post author at the top, some tags, the title, the description. Here you have a little bit of a truncation, read more. And you can notice that this one, by the way, is at the top of the image rather than at the bottom. And there is some tiny nuance to it in terms of what this actually means for the product experience, which I'll cover. And it just generally has to do with how you can truncate the content of your posts. And we did explore that a bit more in depth in a couple of iterations. But just to walk you through this, we really imagine that a feed could be more than just posts, right? So it is not just you engaging with content, it's also you engaging with the community, with some featured users, maybe, always trying to find ways within the product where we can help people come together as a community. And for example, for our old version of Tribe, just the idea that you can follow people in the community to get their updates is a really big part of that community experience. And so finding ways that we could actually, through that mindless scroll, fit in some elements like this, that is part of the reasoning why you would see in this case social cards like this that encourage following. So if you have a feed, always think about what are the big wins that people get from your platform? What are the kinds of actions that you want to encourage, and how can you make that easier without having to add another area or feature, and just think about reusing existing structures, right? Like we did here. So more examples of that, for example, is encouraging people to check out featured topics that the admin decides they want to feature. Again, to encourage users to expand their feed and the kind of content that they get into the feed. And here you have, for example, featured questions, right? So again, same pattern. This is an example actually of the post page that I showed you earlier. And it goes a bit more into the direction that we do want to take things in the new version of Tribe as well, in terms of showing these widgets here that currently we don't have. And that's why you see there's a little bit a lot more white space. And it's because it's reserved to sort of widgets like this that are going to allow the user to either, in this case, stick around the platform a bit more in case they would like their author here and they want to check out other content that this author made or related posts to it. Or actually it's going to encourage visibility of the post by actually getting the user to share it on one of their favorite platforms, right? So that's just why these are here. And you will find that if you are designing a sort of a comment or reply system for social posts, it is one of the trickiest things because you have to think a lot about, especially if you're catering your product to sort of large organizations, enterprise, or just any community with a lot of people, get into the craziest edge cases of okay, what happens if there are hundreds of comments on this post? What happens if there are hundreds of replies? If you have nested comments, we call them replies here. How do you display them? How do you progressively disclose them if you are, for example, getting a notification to a reply within a comment within this post, what is the best way to highlight that content? That is, I think, like, if you always think about in terms of like big numbers, it's going to give you a good perspective of and you know, ability to help you decide on some patterns that you're going to need for your feed experience. One of the biggest things about this though, and one part that I like about this iconography here, which for some reason I'm not sure how far we can continue it in the new version of Tribe, because mainly there are going to be situations where you might have, let's say, an extra action here that says, I don't know, you are in a Q&A space and you want to mark this reply as an answer, right? If we were to follow this pattern, I guess there would be like another icon here, but the action tied to that icon may not be obvious. In this case, because there's only two actions and it's very clear and very simple, you can actually afford it. You can afford to just have a heart and a comment. Same with like a couple like other products, like Twitter has this pattern, Instagram has this pattern of just showing the iconography. It works really well if you have like a tightly defined set of actions per comment, and it does help you to try to not get in the way of the content, right? So because it's sort of like smaller, even though it's kind of bold color to also encourage the action, but there's like a gray background. So it's very subtle in a way, and it actually helps you focus on like, okay, what are these people actually saying? That is pretty good. So that's a piece from there. So again, this is the list view sort of, or at least like more condensed view. This also helps for communities that just want to get like a quicker glance of things, because it means less scroll per post to actually see what's going on. So that is something that we looked at. This is just like another version of this where we explored, actually, because topics are so widely used in the old version of Tribe, that we considered, okay, what are the ways that we can actually highlight that more within the feed? And this was just like one of the things that we explored, where we actually would put like this huge card with a featured topic and then show you some of the latest posts within that topic. So that is a little bit about the old version of Tribe. And then we started thinking a couple months later about actually what is this new product experience going to be like? And I think like one of the bigger fatalities of the project is we aspired to introduce too much fidelity too early. And by fidelity, I mean like, yeah, you get an idea this is quite polished. You know, like you see there's like clear spacing, sort of. Everything is sort of like nicely grouped, nicely organized. The layer structure looks pretty good. Everything is sort of like nicely aligned, and the colors are there. And we did this a couple times, right? As you're going to see, we had a couple of iterations that were actually pretty high fidelity, because we did want to get to that point where we could see sort of the whole package. And I think one of the issues with that is that when you still have like a very high uncertainty of how a product area within your product is going to work, or a certain feature, then of course there's a lot more that you're investing into something that you don't know how it's going to be continued, right? Or how it's going to evolve. So in this case, we did actually evolve this a lot, even though now we can come back and actually look at it and it looks quite nice in some ways, and take away a few learnings. Just keep that in mind, that in our case, for example, this feed was something that we iterated a lot as a result of internally not being clear about how we were going to respond to the needs of our customers, and finding the right design that would help us get there. So we did have to spend a lot of time on it, but at the same time, there were, of course, like good trade-offs, because we had proper learnings, and through the iterations, we got to know each other's interest for the platform better. In my case, as someone who was coming in new to the company, it helped me align better with the sort of like the bigger stakeholders and people that were pushing the product vision. So it's just something to consider when you're like building your product. Always think about like, hey, do I actually need like this super polished thing right now, or can I actually communicate an idea early on with maybe a wireframe? Or it doesn't really have to be a wireframe, but as long as it's quick and you're comfortable with it and you can like iterate through ideas very fast and find the medium that works for you, and get there until you actually get to a place where you can say, okay, I'm going to work on higher fidelity because I really believe that we can push this further into code, prototype it, test it, and so on. So this is just an example that really inspired that thought when I was looking back at it. One of the things that we looked at in the past was this idea of hoverable actions. If you are a Slack user, you may have come across this quite a lot. And it's nice. Now that I'm looking at it, I do have like mixed feelings about it, partially because it is like, unless you have like a native mobile app experience, I think it's harder to pull off on mobile in general, because it does rely on some kind of pop-up or drawer if you're not gonna like automatically just show those actions on view. Then of course it relies on the same principle that these actions are obvious unless you have text. Otherwise you would have to put some text here next to the iconography. But in this case, it's quite obvious. This is a like reaction and this is a comment. So yeah, hard feelings, not hard feelings, mixed feelings about it. But it does work really well if you want to keep the product like sleek in that sense and try to remove clutter from the interface. But we eventually came to the conclusion that these are such important and primary actions per post that it actually doesn't make that much sense to keep that action hidden within a hover interaction. And actually Slack is a little bit different because their primary action is just to encourage a stream of conversation. So actually their main button is actually the composer, right? So they want people to come here and keep on posting messages. In fact, their business model relies on you getting to like, what is it, like 20K messages, right? To pay for their pro plan. So that's where their main action is. And they have all the visibility in the world for it. So keep that in mind when you're like thinking about a pattern like this. Yep, so this is just something that we looked at in the past. We did a lot of back and forth, and through that back and forth also started, even though visually things look different, we began to materialize some decisions and some patterns about how things work. So you can see that at least like there's consistency with the sense of like, for example, how the card structure is, the need for truncation. Then we got into a lot of conversations internally about how to show engagement per post within the feed. That's a very important aspect. We saw, for example, in some platforms, it's typical that you will have one section here for engagement that sits actually at the top of the actions themselves. But actually this can be like done in multiple ways. We saw like products where it's up here, sometimes it's like down here, and like the comments are below the actions, because it is sort of like its own section. But yeah, you're gonna run into like different variants of how this could look, and I'm actually gonna show you a few more. One of the challenges here is that we saw these engagement items here as being like very separate from one another. So we did do a couple of iterations where we were like, okay, I want to actually see all the engagement that this post got within like a certain section of the interface. And right now this was sort of getting in the way of it because we had to like look to the left for likes and then look to the right for comments, or like, you know, this could be a bit all over the place, even though you could argue like, okay, like is on the left, comments on the right, and it kind of makes sense, but we didn't feel like this was going to be the right pattern for us down the line. So here's where we actually got to a lot of discussions about how to actually truncate the content of the post. Because unlike like Facebook, for example, where you have this very clear cut between like you have some text, and then underneath the text, you may have a poll, or you may have a video or an image, and that's it, right? Like you don't put text underneath that. So platforms like Facebook, they allow you to have sort of a post per unit of content, right? In the case of platforms like what we were exploring, but also like any general platform like Medium, let's say, where they have a reliance more on sort of article style content, or maybe a platform like Discourse, where you can put a forum sort of post, and within that post you can write bulleted lists and drop images in any order you want. And that is sort of where we wanted to go. It still is. Like, we want to go in this direction, that at least within the generic like space type or space template, the way the feed works and the way the posts work is that you can put anything on it. You can put file attachments, image galleries, videos, embeds of all sorts. Apps can integrate, and then you can, through those integrations, drop stuff into a post. We all of a sudden came to the realization of like, okay, there is multiple combinations of how a post can be constructed. So what is going to be the appropriate truncation process for that content? And for some time we were like deep into this idea of, okay, these are sort of like blog posts, and we can go along this concept of making it more like this is a preview of the post that you're looking at. So if you go to medium.com, you will see something similar where you're shown like a cover image, the title of the post, and then maybe like a little teaser of what this is all about. And that's something that we tried to do in the past. And in this case, it's actually a post with only this. I was being very lazy. And you can see we just explore like more UI patterns for the bottom section here. Again, same sort of principles, right? In this case, we have like easy iconography, easy for the eye to browse through. It doesn't get in the way of the content. Simple call to action here where you can actually write another comment and it's good to go. And this is an example actually of when commenting systems start to become a little bit more complex. Again, when you start to think about the numbers, right? Of, okay, if there are like 6 more comments, how do I actually show them? Where do you even position this button? Because this is going to be dependent on, let's say, the sorting of the comments, right? So if you have, let's say in this case, you can see this one was like 18 minutes ago, 10 minutes ago, 23. So the last comments, the latest comments are at the bottom. So you would have the new comment here, which makes it a bit more difficult for the user to actually get to that action. And then the loading of previous comments is at the top, because they would load like right on top and make the whole thing a bit longer. So that's just like one iteration, and we actually explored everything. We explored sorting top to bottom, bottom to top, composer here, composer there. So this is by no means end result. And yeah, another sort of more visual iteration of the feed. Here we actually went from designing like a general purpose feed like this to start to think about spaces. And within spaces, the thing is that we envisioned early on, like since very early on, that you could have like multiple tabs. Per space, you would have like one main feed where the posts are, but then depending on the purpose of the space and the apps that are installed within it, you would have other tabs that maybe show like your members or your shared files or popular topics, things like that, right? But again, let me see if I can actually bring this into full view. Okay, perfect. So this is another example of a post sort of UI, right? So same pattern here for author, and here we even put the type of the post that this is, so an article. Again, didn't want to deal with truncation, so we just sort of paddle along this idea of actually hiding the content within a new post. And here you can see that we have a section for actions. So like, comment, this time with text, because we started to envision this idea that, oh, what if we have other actions here that are not so obvious through iconography? Then we started heading in this direction. And here you have the more actions button, which would open up a drop-down menu, and you could open up actions from there. So that's interesting. And then here is sort of a new UI that we introduced for the reply system. So there's a write a comment. It has like these 3 dots. Oh, bunch of fonts that I should have to reinstall. And this is kind of nice because, and we started to go in this direction because we wanted to emulate the sort of end result, right? So it shows already the avatar of the user. And by the time that this user is going to post an update on the video, sorry, not on the video, I'm doing the video, on the post, then they would be able to just sort of have a nice interaction design of just seeing that content being created from the composing experience itself. Okay, that's a little bit about that. And wow, now we're sort of like getting to juicier stuff. At this point, we went like full blown, like back to the drawing board. This whole like truncation issue started to cause like a lot of internal discussions about how to go about things. In terms of like showing this feed, we started to have like more ideas for the product. I think this was also at a time where a lot of people and their minds sort of unlocked because they were working more on the previous product, on the old version of Tribe, and now more people sort of started getting into the conversation of the new product experience, and that just internally caused us to sort of take a step back and look at all the iterations we've made, think about the stuff we really liked, and get really quick and dirty in terms of, okay, what direction do we want to take things into? And this is interesting because we followed this practice of using mood board wireframes. And by this, I mean, we would literally take screenshots of different snippets of other products. So this is full-blown Medium, right? And we would actually paste it in context of other products, of our own product, right? So this is like a UI from like Tribe, and we were exploring, and then this is the screenshot. And here you can see like multiple iterations of us bringing stuff from other platforms. And you can see these are ultimately social platforms. And this is on purpose because part of what Tribe is all about is that you can build not just communities, but your own social platform. And depending on the kind of media, the kind of content that you want to post there, then you're going to have, again, going back to that customization conversation, you're going to want to display content differently, right? So if you're just all about videos, maybe you should have a grid layout and display content like this. So again, yeah, going back to that discussion, this was sort of the vision that we had for Tribe all along. And so actually bringing screenshots from other social platforms, established social platforms, and bringing them and looking at them side by side gave us a better understanding of, one, just general best practices, but also what would kind of be the end result of how all these different products that are scattered across like different companies look like under a single platform. And of course, like when you actually get to build it, you have to make all these trade-offs, but at least it gives you a good idea of the vision for the product that you have. So with that said, we then actually took a route into the concept of pages, which persists up to today. And the idea is that we wanted to differentiate the idea of just like a feed of content tied to either the entire community or to a single space from the concept of being like, hey, I'm an admin of this community and I want to give like a custom, maybe like onboarding or landing view for my users to explore things in the community. Like for example, spaces you might be interested in joining or people you might be interested in following. And we had this idea since like a few months back of introducing a customizable page experience. So it's sort of like a feed, and I dropped it here because I think it has some similarities with respect to just the general idea of what a feed means or could mean to your product. So I just wanted to showcase these to you because I think we had some cool ideas here in terms of, how do you actually get to customize a page? And we're going to spin up like a lot of iterations on this. So don't take anything for granted here. But in case you're wondering, what are some of the directions we might be heading into in the future? Here's a little bit of a teaser for you. So that brings us to here. And I'm saying this because, believe it or not, this was actually our first private beta of the new version of Tribe, we actually pushed this to production. So this became like the first version of the product that we had a live version on the internet where I could browse and use it and play with it, and people could come together within our company and interact through a community built with the new Tribe. Now, I think it's worth taking a step back and thinking about what that means and what actually got us to this point and why we did this. And I think like if I think back and I try to reason through why this was the first private beta, and you might look at this and be like, what the hell is this? Might not look great. It might not make a lot of sense to you. But in the context of being a group of people that come together and want to build a product, I think one of the most important aspects of it is that you have a sort of internal alignment of where is it that you want to take your product in the future. And based on that, having an aligned understanding and confidence that this version is aligned with where we want to go. So of course, not all of it ended up being where we wanted to take things, but there's a lot of little like things here and there that we actually felt like we had the right confidence in order for us to actually get this going. And I think also just because we were running out of time to actually show something, and this was sort of like where we were. But again, we had a lot of confidence in why we were shipping this and how we were shipping it. So you still have the idea of spaces highlighted here, some navigation at the top, the widgets on the side, same principles that I've discussed earlier, and still a concept of tabs in the space. So you can switch between feed, members, settings, you have a composer, you have posts. And for some time we were, also took a step back from the whole truncation thing and actually brought this idea of sort of like a white gradient that gives you a taste of like, hey, this post is not over. If you want to actually check it out entirely, you should then click into it and see the whole thing. But of course, there were issues with this as well, because depending on what the post contains, you never know if you have to make, like, where do you actually make the right cut, right? If you have a post that's just a poll, let's say, don't you want to show the whole poll, right? Instead of like cutting the paragraph itself in this case, right? So we would run into like a lot of edge cases where we were saying, hey, like this might not be the best visual pattern for us. We had this idea again that you would go into the post page itself to consume the entire content of a post, and that is because of this idea of the post in Tribe being so rich, right? That we didn't feel comfortable or didn't figure out a way to how to appropriately package that into something that we could actually post into a general feed with a lot of posts side by side. So we're still having doubts about that, but this was sort of like an idea we had for a long time, that every post should have a page of its own. And that is for sure part of like what we are working on for the feed experience. Some months passed, we took that version that you just saw on top and we started to polish it and iterate on it. And we eventually landed on something that looks a lot like the current experience, actually. So you can see here, we brought back some old concepts. We brought back the tabs. We brought back more easily identifiable actions at the top right here for the space. And you can see a composer with a bit more of a polish and gives you an idea of what you can do with it. And here you can see that we brought back this idea of sorting the feed and then being able to see here this new structure for the card itself of the post. So again, post author here, more options, title, content. And here you can actually see that we reserved, we went into the direction again of like iconography first actions, because we were exploring like how we could push that further and how far we could push it. And then we still had here like the engagement sort of separated between reactions here. So we moved into the reactions territory. So lots of emojis from here onwards, and comments on the right side, and then having like a very simple composer at the bottom for writing comments. that's a bit of the direction we're going into. This is the sort of experience for like posting a reply. We had some ideas in terms of this being an actual app that's installed in the platform, and what are the kinds of settings that you can toggle on and off in order for you to customize things to your desire, right? So we were looking at a lot of like use cases from our existing customers and what they wanted and needed, and looking into, okay, how can we provide this flexible product without shooting ourselves in the foot of having to maintain all these interfaces, but still giving a little bit of customization. And so these were just some of the things we were exploring back then. And we went to some extent like pretty crazy in terms of like the layout customization, widgetization of things. So beware, we are exploring all these things, but it does take a little bit of time and lots of edge cases to actually get to a result that we can be proud of shipping. So that's that. We also, so this is, again, starts to look a lot more like the current experience. I think we're almost getting there. I think the rest starts to become a bit more tiny iterations. But here you can see we're exploring like other features that we may introduce in the future. Like, for example, assigning people to questions, right? So this is, for example, something that we think could be really useful to a lot of our customers and to ourselves as well. But we just never really had the scope or prioritization to actually deliver this because other things came up. And you will find this a lot probably within your own product too, that because of the ease of design, maybe within your team, you will get to think about a lot of features, but there will be not enough time or proper scope planning for this in order to happen. So I think that's a sort of collaborative effort with other people in your company. If you have PMs or leads involved in like scoping the product, to always think about what can we scope in a healthy way that it doesn't go like too far, but it's also kind of nice that your design team can actually take things sort of a next step and always think about, what you're building plus a couple more things if you have the certainty that you want to take the product in a certain direction or at least explore it. So when you then go into those features, you're not trapped into a pattern that it's like, oh, now I designed this, it doesn't work with that other feature. What do we do now? We have to probably refactor stuff, right? So that's a little bit about that. And again, we went sort of pretty crazy on customization. We looked at, what if the user could have like this column here that is all about sort of just toggling things on and off and then having some controls. So that's another vision of customization that actually at this stage is pretty close to what we do want to ship. And I'll share that with you in a few minutes. And this is, again, getting very close to what we have at the moment, but also different features. So this was another version of questions. We had this idea in the past that spaces could have like two sort of content types, like a discussion and questions, and we eventually found this to be like very confusing for the user. Because like imagine you come to a group and it says like feedback, and then you have discussion and questions. Where do you post your question? Is it a discussion or is it a question? So we eventually found like a lot of scenarios where that could be a point of confusion for our customers and their users. So we eventually moved back to sort of single purpose, single post type kind of space. And that's a whole other topic of conversation. But again, you see lots of white space because we actually do want to introduce like some widgets here. But yeah, that's where things were at here. And, eventually as time passes by, we think about posts for more apps and more use cases. You start to land on some patterns. This is when you can actually start to think about, okay, maybe we should make these into like proper components. So we have a design system going on with some organism level components with some nested elements inside, and that's fine. It took us a long time to get here, but once you eventually start to see things sort of come into place, you start to formalize patterns and build certainty over your product. And doing retros every now and then actually do help you formalize that work. So you can see here the idea of like this diagram showing you the post structure and also the way that we would handle, in this case, for example, comments, right? So that's a bit about the idea. This is also pretty close to the current experience of the Explore page, which is a page that right now is static, which means that you cannot actually customize it too much. But because we had little time and we did actually have a fair amount of this stuff coded, but not to the extent that we could push the whole customization thing forward, we did ship a version of the Explore page that is static, but also dynamic in terms of these sections being uploaded with content that is going to be live based on the content of your community. Actually, the first version of this page, we did ship it with hard-coded, data and content, and it's because we wanted to give people the idea that this is where we want to go, but we didn't have time to actually make it all that dynamic. So that's a little bit of a side story there related to scoping and actually shipping things in time and dealing with lots of trade-offs of, okay, what do we actually do in this case? Trying to avoid the truncation dilemma that has been with us since forever. We had a period where we actually tried to push a sort of more forum-like experience and think about it like, you're in this space and then everything you see here is sort of a row that shows you the title of the post, people that engaged, some data. This was pretty interesting for our customer success people because it gave them like a really good insight, sort of like quick glance of what's going on per post. So that speaks in favor of sort of like this compact view. But yeah, it's not something that we move forward with for the general purpose discussions app or spaces because you do miss a lot of the conversation, right? It's not a card that you can easily expand and collapse and play with and reply. You have to go into the post page, and it's just generally something that really pushed us back in terms of realizing that vision. And we played with a lot of stuff here, as you can see. This is a whole different space type. So we eventually got to sit down and we're like, hey, this whole truncation thing is pretty important for us. We cannot go forward without making a decision right here, right now, about how it is that we want to truncate the content of our posts. And so we did take a couple days to run through all the post types that we had, run through a few scenarios, and then this is an example of, for example, how we thought about communicating different scenarios where truncation would be applied based on the contents of the post. And this is pretty important when it comes to a feed experience, because if you think about Facebook, Facebook has this focus view that I mentioned earlier, and it does make for a very swift, sort of like streamlined browsing experience because you always get that focused content. In the case of Tribe, there might be scenarios where you post an image, but you have so much text that you don't get to see the image unless you click on see more, and that can be a browsing experience downfall. So how do we make it possible to actually have situations where we can show a little bit of text and maybe a little bit of content of like an image if it's at the very top of the post, for example? What if it's just an image and then there's like content below it? Or what if it's just an image first and then there's like text but like underneath it? So we did run through like a couple of examples here to try and get the truncation right, because we did want to go down this direction eventually of having cards, because the whole like card social experience conversations around the card was important for us. And yeah, we still might provide in the future another sort of experience or customization that does look a little bit more like this for a more sort of like forum-like experience. But this is the sensible default that we are going with for now. And this looks quite similar to what we have at the moment. So this is a refinement of the Explore page. It's currently very similar to what we have in production. So one of the important things about this, and maybe let's see if I can actually skip to that here, is so this is a more refined vision that we have for the Explore page, customization that we don't have right now in production, because it does take like a substantial amount of effort to actually get something like this going. And it's the idea that you have this sort of no code page builder. You can see the widgets per page sort of like if you're on Photoshop and you're browsing through your layers. And if you click on any of them, then remember how I showed you that explore page like from earlier on with the toggles? That is something that we did bring back from the dead in terms of thinking, okay, I have this widget here that is showing me ultimately like a stream of posts, and I'm thinking about, you know, what kind of metadata, what kind of like content within each post do I want to show? And what post should I include? How many posts should I include? And things like that. And yeah, this is just to say this might be something that we may deliver down the line. And it sort of fits into the vision of how Tribe wants to operate as a platform for a customizable community experience. And yeah, do expect some updates on this regard soon. And as you can see, you can go quite crazy. This is an example of a spaces widget. You can change the style from, let's say, carousel to grid, and you can enable like subtitles. You can specify what spaces you want to highlight here. And this might be pretty relevant because maybe you want to show spaces that the user is not a part of yet, so they actually get to join it. And this goes kind of full circle here, because here we had a static experience. For our customers to actually change this with CSS and JavaScript, it's really hard. And it does require like a lot of technical experience. So part of what makes this new version of Tribe pretty special is that we're going to get to enable situations like these where what we had before as very arduous, sort of code-driven customization is going to be all of a sudden a few clicks away. And I think that is pretty exciting, and it's going to enable a lot of people to create the feed experience that they want for their customers, for their end users, based on, you know, whatever it is that they're after with their community. So that is pretty exciting. And here you can see just a general vision of what things will look like once we maybe consider some widgets here on the side. And again, this is starting to look very similar to the current product experience. So here you can see a sort of a mix between just normal posts and question posts. And yeah, I think that pretty much does it. These are examples of this tricky reply system that I mentioned earlier. So just a more refined understanding of how we want to go about that, but still you find some patterns that we had since very early on. So that's the thing, you know, if you go back in time and you think, you know, I did go pretty deep into it and it was quite polished. Maybe you didn't pick it up then, but a couple months later, that idea in a new context might mean something different to you, and you can actually recycle a lot of stuff. And yeah, this is also, I dropped this one here. I think this is a funny frame because you can design great things and think really hard about edge cases and stuff like that. And there will still be scenarios that you're like, oh shoot, you know, the customer bumped into this scenario and we didn't account for it. So what do we do? And this is an actual screenshot of the product in a situation where you just created your community, you go to the explore page and there is nothing. And of course that makes sense because the explore page is all about highlighting user generated content. If you don't have users and those users don't generate content, then you don't have anything to show here. And that could be okay if you consider that your customer, like our customer, would first seed the community with content before actually onboarding users into their community, as is a common practice for a lot of communities. But it still looks quite empty. It's a pretty bad first experience. And it is something that we're working on. But it does sort of bring a nice message here, a nice learning, which is when you are dealing with products that are all about user-generated content, you got to think about your placeholders. Think about great placeholders in situations where the content may not be there. And that is going to happen a lot to you, not only during the onboarding experience, when your customer is just onboarded into your product and there's nothing, but also think about, you know, somebody just created a post in your product and there are no replies and that section just lies empty. but you actually do want to find ways to encourage users to follow up and reply to that post. So how can you introduce an interface that is going to bring that into light to encourage more engagement? So I think with that said, I'm going to be calling this a wrap. I hope that there's a couple nuggets here and there that you can take for your own good. And if you are a customer of Tribe and you're looking forward to hearing and seeing stuff that we're working on, I hope that some of this stuff excites you. And if it does, please let me know in the comments. And so that brings this video to a wrap. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, as usual, don't forget to let me know in the comments if you have any questions or comments, suggestions, general feedback. Drop it all down there. I read every single one of you, and I appreciate it very, very much. As mentioned, this is the second delivery of a 5 core product area video series for a social multiplayer product experience. So do expect a new video with a new core product area coming very soon. If you want to stay tuned to that update, the best thing you can do to follow that is to subscribe to my channel. And by the way, if you like this video, don't forget to give it a little like also down below, just to let me know that you enjoyed it and that you found it interesting, so I can continue to make content like this in the near future. As always, I hope that you are well and you stay safe, and I will catch you in the next one.